He sits in stone, frozen in time, jaw tight, eyes wide, shoulders squared as if he still bears the burden of a cosmos. He does not speak because he cannot. He has not spoken in 3,000 years. Yet here he is, his image carved into the face of an altar, framed by the gaping mouth of a supernatural beast. Neither man nor God, neither ancestor nor myth. And though his name has crumbled into oblivion, his presence lingers, still, haunting, eternal. This is the ruler. Not a king as we know kings, not a priest as we know priests, but something older, something heavier, something more dangerous. Long before the Maya etched their glyphs or the Aztecs raised their temples, a people called the Olmec moved through the steaming wetlands of what is now southern Mexico. They fished in rivers that wound like serpents through the mangroves, tilled the rich earth for maize, traded obsidian and jade across great distances. They lived in a world where the heavens arched above, the watery underworld lurked below, and the earth in between pulsed with the power of spirits. This was no symbolic philosophy. It was the architecture of their reality. And at the center of that reality stood Venta, a sacred city built not of stone, but of earth, sweat, and cosmic precision. And rising from the heart of Venta, watching over its altars and sacred avenues, stood the ruler. He was not born with power, he was born into it. A child marked by signs, perhaps a serpent-shaped birthmark, or a dream had by a priest at the moment of his birth? We will never know, but the signs would have mattered. In Olmec tradition, rulers were not merely chosen by bloodline. They were chosen by the gods, or at least by those who interpreted the will of the gods. And from that moment, the ruler ceased to belong to himself. His earliest memories may have been of water, the river flooding its banks, the hiss of rain on palm leaves, the sweat running down the back of his neck as he was led barefoot through the swamp to a cave that gaped like the mouth of the underworld. There, masked men daubed with red ochre taught him the chants of the ancestors. They scarred his arms, not in cruelty, but in ritual, so that his blood might know the shape of pain. They whispered to him of the gods of maize, of rain, of jaguar spirits that walk between worlds. They told him he would become the channel through which power flowed. He would not rule because he desired it. He would rule because the universe required it. As he grew, Venta grew around him. What had once been a village of reed houses swelled into a ceremonial center. Builders moved earth by hand, piling it into platforms aligned with the movement of the sun. A great mound rose from the plain, almost pyramid-like, though made not of stone, but of earth layered with dedication. At its peak, the gods would descend. At its base, the people would gather. And at the axis where those two forces met would stand the ruler. He ascended to power not in celebration, but in silence. There was no grand coronation, no shouted proclamations. Instead, there was descent. Into a chamber beneath the mound, the ruler was led. It was shaped like a cave, dark, cool, humming with incense and unseen breath. There offerings were laid, polished axes of jade, figurines with hollow eyes, beads of serpentinite. Blood was spilled, goat, bird, perhaps even human. And the ruler, emerging from the darkness, was reborn as something more than a man. He was now the point through which the sky and the underworld were tethered. He appeared to his people adorned not with gold, but with meaning, a headdress of quetzal feathers, a collar of carved jade, a cloak dyed in the blood of cochineal insects. Each item a glyph, a prayer, a statement. To look upon him was to glimpse the sacred, but the ruler beneath the masks and ornaments remained flesh. He bled when cut, he wept when alone. He feared what came in the night. None of this was visible to the people, and none of it was permitted to interfere with his role. He was no longer allowed to be human. He was a symbol, a bridge, a burden. And the burden was immense. Each season brought new rituals. The planting of maize required offerings to the earth. The summer rains demanded the blood of birds. When lightning split the sky, a ceremony followed lest the gods be angry. When an eclipse darkened the sun, the ruler himself had to bleed. cutting the soft parts of his own body to show the universe he was willing to suffer for balance. His pain was public, ceremonial, sacred, but pain alone did not preserve power. The world outside La Venta grew restless. Rival towns rose to the east and west, their leaders whispering of their own divine mandate. The ruler watched as trade routes wavered, as emissaries returned with rumors of discontent, as the supply of jade, so critical to ritual, became unreliable. The gods demanded jade, the people demanded answers, and the ruler, still young in his reign, realized that his throne sat not only on earth, but on the edge of a knife. It was during this time that the first of the great heads was carved. Colossal, weighty, impossible. How they moved the stone is still a mystery, but what mattered more was whose face it bore. Flattened nose, thick lips, a gaze both commanding and distant. The face was stylized, yes, but recognizable. It was the ruler, or at least the idea of him. A face made eternal, a warning, a monument, a god who looked like a man, or a man who was becoming stone. To the people, the head was awe-inspiring. They saw in it the permanence of order, the security of the sacred. But to the ruler it was a mirror he could not avoid. Each time he passed it, he saw himself as others would see him long after he was gone. Silent, staring, immobile. And it frightened him. Not because he feared death, but because he feared disappearance. He feared becoming a symbol so powerful that his soul would be erased. In the privacy of his chambers, beneath the vaulted ceilings adorned with shell mosaics and smoky braziers, the ruler began to drift inward. He slept less. He ate less. He listened more to omens, to dreams, to the rustling of wind across thatched roofs. He began to sense that the world was not as it had been. The balance was shifting, and he began to wonder whether it was truly the gods speaking through him, or whether the gods had never spoken at all. Yet he could not stop. Ritual was survival. Doubt was treason. The cycles of the moon moved forward, and so did the machinery of sacred kingship. Offerings were made. Children danced in ceremonies. Blood continued to flow. The people continued to believe, or perhaps they only pretended to believe. Perhaps, like him, they performed out of fear, of drought, of disease, of change. One day, standing atop the sacred mound, looking down at the plaza where thousands gathered to watch him raise his arms in blessing, the ruler felt the weight of all of them pressing upward, not with love, not even with reverence, but with need. They needed him to be stable. They needed him to be eternal. They needed him to never change. And in that moment, he realized the throne was not a seat. It was a cage. La Venta flourished, but the ruler's soul withered. His image multiplied, appearing on altars carved into thrones, buried beneath mosaic floors. But the man inside that image became increasingly hollow. His power was unmatched, yet his freedom was gone. His life was one of constant visibility and absolute isolation. He turned more and more to the ancient traditions, built deeper altars, ordered more lavish burials, poured greater riches into the earth to appease whatever forces governed the fragile balance of the universe. But each act left him more uncertain. The gods remained silent. The rains came, but came late. The maize grew, but withered early. And still the people bowed, still the priests chanted, still the blood flowed. And so the ruler continued, not because he believed, but because stopping would destroy everything. Because doubt was not an option for someone who was belief incarnate. This is how the first part of his story ends. Not in triumph or tragedy, but in tension, in stillness, in the slow, grinding weight of eternity settling on a man still trying to remember the shape of his own voice. He sits in stone now. You can see him still. At La Venta, in the Gulf lowlands, his image remains. He stares at us from across time, his mouth forever closed, his eyes forever open. The ruler, so heavy with meaning, so empty of name. You may think you cannot know him, but look closer. Look past the stone. You'll see a man trapped in the shape of a god, trying not to vanish. Before he became the ruler, before the stone heads and sacred altars bore his likeness, he was simply a child. Barefoot in the mud, skin damp with sweat, his shadow cast long and uncertain against the reeds of the riverbank. He was not yet legend. He was not yet burden. He was only a boy born into a world teetering between balance and disaster. The year of his birth was marked by storms. The rains came early, then didn't stop. What had once been seasonal blessing became deluge. The rivers overflowed their banks and swallowed the maize fields. The gods were displeased, said the priests. They spoke of broken cycles, corrupted offerings, forgotten rituals. Entire families were displaced. Villages turned into floating islands of hunger. His own family, if we can still call them that, watched their fields dissolve into swamp. And yet, amidst that chaos, a child was born who did not drown. The midwife claimed she had seen a blue serpent coil around the boy's umbilical cord. The head priest of the rain cult said his arrival coincided with a rare celestial alignment. His mother, a woman of noble but fading lineage, named him with a private whisper, then never spoke that name aloud again. She would not raise him. He would not be held or suckled or sung to like other children. From the moment his eyes opened, he was no longer hers. He belonged to the priests, to the mound, to the future. The first memories he carried were not of lullabies or warmth, but of wet earth and smoke. Taken from his household before his first harvest, he was raised in a sequestered compound behind the ceremonial court, watched over by eunuch servants and masked attendants who never spoke his name. They referred to him only as the chosen. His every gesture was recorded, interpreted, categorized. A cough might mean the gods were amused. A fever might signify impurity. A smile could be seen as divine approval, or worse, irreverence. He was never taught to play. Games were for those who would die without being remembered. Instead, his days were spent in preparation for eternity. Before he was old enough to know fear, he was taken into the earth itself, led by torchlight through carved tunnels that mimicked the mouths of sacred caves. There, the priests recited the origin myths of the world, while blood dripped from their tongues, drawn by obsidian knives. These were not bedtime stories. These were rehearsals for sacrifice. The child was expected to memorize every phase of the moon, every shift of the stars, every gesture of the sacred dance performed at solstice. His body was measured, stretched, painted. He was forbidden to speak out of turn. If he cried, it was considered a sign that the gods were testing him. If he laughed, he was punished until silence returned. This was not cruelty in the eyes of his caretakers. It was devotion. But within him, a quiet rebellion brewed. In the rare moments of solitude, when the chants faded and the incense cleared, he would slip away to the river, not to flee but to feel. He would crouch at the edge of the reeds and watch the herons stalk fish in the muddy shallows. He would press his fingers into the earth and listen to the rumble beneath it. He was told the underworld dwelled below, but he wondered even then if the gods lived there at all, or if they were just stories grown too large to ignore. He had no friends, only instructors. No siblings, only reflections of himself in polished obsidian bowls. Yet there was one figure who returned often, an older priest whose face was always hidden beneath a mask carved in the shape of a snarling jaguar. This priest never struck him, never raised his voice, but his presence chilled the air. The boy came to call him the Watcher, though never aloud. He would later learn that the Watcher had once been the favored seer of the previous ruler, a man who had vanished during the flood years without a funeral or a tomb. It was the Watcher who led the child into his first real rite of passage, the witnessing of a human sacrifice. He was 10, or perhaps 11. The age mattered less than the moment. A crowd had gathered before the ceremonial platform, the same mound that would one day become his throne. Smoke spiraled from burning copal. The drums pounded like the heartbeat of a god. A prisoner was brought forward, bound, painted blue, eyes open wide with something more than fear. The boy was instructed to watch. He was not told why. When the obsidian blade entered the man's chest and cracked through bone, the Watcher whispered into the boy's ear, "This is the price of the rain." The boy did not scream. He did not faint. But something inside him shifted. It was not revulsion. It was not awe. It was a question, sharp and insistent. If this was the price of rain, who decided to pay it? And who decided who would pay? That night he did not sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his chamber, tracing with his eyes the spirals and glyphs etched into the wood above. For the first time, he did not feel like a child. He felt like something else, something watching itself from a distance, unsure if it was the dreamer or the dream. The next day, he was different. He did not flinch when the priest recited death chants. He did not question when his tutor spoke of the gods demanding blood. But he also did not believe, not fully. Instead, he learned the value of Mass, of saying one thing while thinking another, of performing divinity until no one could tell the difference. It was this talent, not his birthright, not his dreams, not his visions, that truly prepared him for rule. By the time he reached manhood, the rains had returned to their patterns, but the city had not. La Venta, still rising, demanded more than ritual. It demanded charisma, it demanded fear. And so he learned to become what they needed. In public, he was silent, composed, radiant. In private, he read the cracks in the temple walls like script. He read the fear in the eyes of priests who no longer heard the gods. He understood finally what the Watcher had tried to teach him. Divinity was not belief, it was control. But beneath the mask, the boy still lived. The one who had crouched by the river. The one who had wondered what lay beneath the earth. That boy was never truly gone. Only buried, like the mosaic floors beneath La Venta, laid in perfect patterns, never meant to be seen. When the time came to declare him sacred, the rituals unfolded with mechanical grandeur. He was led into the inner sanctum, dressed in jade and feather, his face painted with the mask of the maize god. He was made to sit beneath a carved arch shaped like the jaws of a supernatural beast, the portal between worlds. He was offered the obsidian blade and told to cut his own flesh, to mark his blood as a seal upon the covenant. He did. He did not tremble. He did not cry. He did not believe. He simply became. And thus the ruler was born, not from faith, but from necessity, not from prophecy, but from performance. The boy had been erased. The man remained, a figure now carved in memory in stone and silence. The child of storms had survived the flood, but in doing so, he had become the storm itself. The mound rose slowly, like breath held for centuries. Each basket of earth carried by hand, each layer packed under sun and storm, each tier aligned not to human need, but to celestial rhythm. It was not merely construction, it was a heartbeat given shape. And when it was finished, when the massive pyramid of La Venta finally crowned the sacred center, it did not resemble a monument. It resembled a being. It breathed in silence. It pulsed with ritual, and it became the spine of the ruler's authority. The mound was the highest point in all directions, a man-made mountain where none should exist. Its purpose was not defense, it was declaration. To rise above the swamp, to reach skyward from the floodplain, was to claim dominion over chaos. And at its summit stood the ruler, not as architect, but as axis, the place where earth met sky, where ritual met reality, where fear met faith. La Venta had grown from a cluster of reed huts into a sacred city. Pilgrims came from the coasts, from the highlands, from river towns to the east. They brought offerings, obsidian blades, jaguar pelts, bundles of cacao, and above all, jade. The city sparkled not with gold, but with green, the color of life, the breath of the gods, the symbol of divine favor. And the ruler stood at the center, flanked by priests and dancers, draped in carved necklaces, eyes hidden beneath the shadow of a headdress heavy with meaning. But as the city rose, so did the weight of silence. For all its grandeur, La Venta was not immune to the rot that begins in whispers. Beyond the sacred plazas, where commoners labored in the heat, voices questioned why the gods demanded so much. Beyond the ceremonial altars, rival clans spoke of past glories, of San Lorenzo, once great, now abandoned, and wondered if La Venta too would fall. And within the temple precincts, among the very priests who offered blood to the gods, murmurs took root. The ruler did not bleed enough. The rains came late. The omens were unclear. Was the balance tipping? It was not a revolution. It was something slower, a soft erosion of certainty. And the ruler felt it long before he saw it. He sensed it in the eyes of his attendants. downcast, unreadable. He sensed it in the offerings brought by faraway lords. Smaller, less frequent. He sensed it in the dreams that came without warning, dreams of drowning, of being buried alive, of hearing the chants of his own funeral echo before he had died. He told no one. He consulted no oracle. But he knew. In response, he did what rulers always do when threatened. He built. He ordered new plazas. He commissioned colossal heads, each carved from stone, dragged overland, from mountains more than 100 kilometers away. How they were moved remains unknown, but move they did, pulled by men bound by rope and fear and faith. Each head bore the features of a ruler, flat-nosed, heavy-lipped, solemn. Whether they were all him or his ancestors or a dynasty of silent watchers, no one dared to say. They were placed facing outward, guarding the ceremonial core like stone sentinels. Their faces never changed, their eyes never closed. And still the ruler remained calm. Publicly, privately, his world narrowed. He spent less time among the priests, more time alone in the chambers beneath the mound. There, among buried offerings and ancient carvings, he searched for signs. He traced the outline of serpents coiled on clay walls. He whispered to figurines made of jade. He fasted for days, hoping for vision. What he found instead was a man he did not recognize, himself reflected in polished stone, thinner, colder, eyes ringed with shadow. It was in this silence that a new voice emerged. His name was Khan, a war leader from the western marches, born to a rival lineage, known for taming a jaguar with his bare hands. Charismatic, sharp, and blasphemously pragmatic, Khan had risen not through ritual, but through action. He had secured trade routes. He had quelled uprisings. He had brought back more tribute than any emissary. The people adored him. The priests tolerated him. The ruler watched him. Khan did not speak against the gods, but he spoke of balance. He did not mock the rituals, but he questioned their cost. He did not challenge the ruler directly, but he smiled too long, bowed too briefly, and gathered too many followers. In council, he offered advice that felt like corrections. In ceremony, he offered gifts that felt like bribes. And the ruler, for the first time, felt a presence beside his own, a presence that cast a long shadow. The tension was never declared. It did not need to be. The city felt it. The drums in the plazas beat faster. The sacrifices became more elaborate. The ruler ordered a new series of buried mosaics, serpentine tiles laid in the shape of sacred beings, never meant to be seen by human eyes, only by the gods below. He did not ask for advice. He gave no explanation. He simply pointed, and the earth swallowed the offering. But power, once questioned, does not return to stillness. A delegation from the east arrived late one season, lords from the hill country who once pledged loyalty to Venta. They brought no jade, no cacao, only words. Khan is strong. It was not a threat. It was a fact. And the ruler, seated on his throne beneath the carved jaw of the cave beast, understood that his throne was no longer the only one. He summoned Khan. The war leader arrived in full regalia, cloaked in feathers, armed with a blade of obsidian sharp enough to cut the wind. He bowed. He smiled. He spoke of loyalty, of tradition, of the need for adaptation in times of change. The ruler listened. He said nothing. He looked into the eyes of Khan, and he saw not ambition, but certainty. A man who believed not in gods, but in patterns, in cycles, in power as momentum, not mandate. And he realized with cold clarity that this man could not be silenced by fear. He had already dismissed it. That night, the ruler walked the length of the sacred mound alone. Beneath the stars above the buried offerings, he made his decision. Khan did not die in battle. He did not die in a ritual. He vanished. One day he was seen entering the inner court. The next he was gone. No body, no blood, only silence. The official story was elevation. He had been taken by the gods, ascended in vision, honored beyond the veil. The priests wept. The people bowed. But the city knew. A new colossal head was erected. It bore no name. Its features were softer, rounder, almost unfamiliar. But its eyes stared westward, the direction Khan had come from, and did not blink. The ruler had survived, but something within him cracked. He did not speak of Khan again. He did not dream of drowning. He did not fast. He began to eat more, to drink more, to sleep longer. And yet the silence in his chambers only grew. He had protected the throne. He had preserved the rituals. He had crushed the whisper. But in doing so, he had become the very thing he feared most: stone. There are no monuments bearing her name, no stone altars carved in her image, no mosaic laid to remember her gaze. And yet, without her, the ruler would have never stood. Without her, the throne would have crumbled from within, not from revolt or drought, but from the silent corrosion of isolation. She was his queen, his partner, his shadow, and, eventually, his undoing. And like him, she wore a mask. One name in ceremony, another in whispers. One for the gods, one for herself. She arrived not as a bride, but as a treaty. Her people lived upriver, masters of floodplain agriculture, guardians of river crossings, keepers of a priestly lineage older than Venta itself. The union was not one of passion, nor of affection, but of necessity. Her father had held back tribute for 3 seasons. Her brother had hinted at alliance with rival hill tribes. Her marriage to the ruler was the olive branch that became a leash, or so they thought. She entered the city like smoke, subtle, graceful, difficult to grasp. Her first public appearance was during the Moon Festival, where she stood beside the ruler in a headdress of shimmering blue shell, her expression unreadable. She neither smiled nor bowed, but when she looked into the eyes of the gathered crowd, they looked away first. In ceremony, she was called the consort of balance. But in private, among her handmaidens, she was known by a different name, one the ruler was never told. He did not ask. He had learned not to ask for things the gods did not offer freely. Their union was sealed in ritual, a week of fasting, a shared bloodletting, a night spent beneath the temple mound in silence, lying on opposite ends of a cold stone slab carved with spirals of eternity. It was not a wedding. It was an agreement. She gave him legitimacy among rival clans. He gave her position at the sacred core. Neither expected more, and for a time, neither needed more. She did not interfere with court matters. She did not speak during rituals, but she watched, always watched. From balconies, from behind embroidered veils, from the shadows of pillars where dancers rehearsed before the solstice rites. She learned the rhythms of the city, not from reports, but from servants' gossip, from the tilt of a priest's shoulder, from the way children stopped playing when a decree came too close to home. She understood power not as command, but as presence. And she used that understanding to build something the ruler could not: memory. In the quiet corridors of the inner palace, she restored the old songs of her people. She gathered women from across Venta's noble houses and trained them not just in spinning or embroidery, but in lineage. Who descended from whom, who had given land, who had sacrificed children, who had withheld tribute. She became the keeper of a living ledger, and in doing so, she became irreplaceable. The ruler at first appreciated her discipline. He respected her silence, admired her devotion to ceremonial order. But he did not love her, nor she him. They coexisted like weather and stone, affecting each other, but never truly blending. Still, they had children. Their firstborn was a son. The city erupted in celebration, not for the boy, but for the omen. A male heir, a sign of favor, a future secured. Priests consulted the calendar and declared the child blessed. He was named in ceremony, held aloft by the ruler, bathed in flower petals and ritual smoke. The ruler looked into the infant's eyes and saw nothing. Not love, not recognition, only reflection. Another vessel to be filled. Their second child was a girl. There was no public celebration, no ritual. Her birth was marked by rain and silence. She was named in private, nursed in private, and kept far from the ceremonial court. The ruler barely acknowledged her. But the queen, the woman with 2 names, clung to the girl like breath. She taught the child not through priests, but through song. She told her stories not of gods, but of grandmothers. She showed her how to walk without being heard, how to read the wind, how to see through masks. And when the girl asked about the stone heads, her mother whispered a truth few dared speak. They are not gods, they are prisons. The ruler noticed the distance. At first he dismissed it, a queen's affection for her child, a mother's harmless rebellion. But when the girl turned 5, something changed. During the equinox ceremony, she vanished. The city searched, priests divined, gates were sealed. No ransom came, no body found. Some said she wandered into the river and was taken. Others whispered of a sacrifice gone unannounced. But among the queen's handmaidens, a different rumor spread, that the child had been sent away, hidden, preserved, protected from becoming another tool in a city that turned humans into masks. The queen never spoke of it, not to the ruler, not to her maids, not even to the gods. But from that day, she no longer wore her ceremonial name. She stopped attending rituals. She stopped weaving sacred garments. She stopped smiling in public. She dressed in black, not the color of mourning, but of resistance. When the ruler summoned her, she came. When he dismissed her, she stayed. She was no longer a wife, no longer a consort. She had become something more dangerous, memory without obedience. The ruler responded with silence. He did not confront her. He did not punish her. He simply erased her from the story. New rituals no longer mentioned her lineage. New carvings showed him alone. New decrees bore only his seal. And yet every evening, when he walked the sacred court, she stood there, silent, unmoved, wrapped in a cloak of obsidian dye, staring at the head carved in his likeness. They lived together, ate at the same table, slept in separate chambers, shared no words, only echoes. Years passed. Their son grew. He learned the chants. He learned the cycles. He learned the posture of kingship, but he also learned from his mother the way to listen without answering, the way to smile without believing. The ruler watched this, unsure whether to be proud or afraid. One night during the Festival of Ancestors, the ruler awoke to find a single item placed on the center of the altar in his private chamber, a doll made of river clay, shaped like a girl, with eyes carved too deeply, as if gouged by grief. He said nothing. The next morning the queen was gone. No announcement, no search, no explanation. Some believed she fled. Others believed she returned to her people upriver. But in the weeks that followed, the palace changed. The servants whispered less. The priests stumbled more in their chants. The air grew thick with unease. The ruler ordered a new altar to be built, a small one hidden behind the main mound, not open to the public. There he buried the doll. He did not ask the gods for anything. He did not offer blood. He simply placed the clay figure in the earth and covered it with silence. That was the last time he prayed. The river had always murmured beneath the surface of Venta, soft, slow, eternal. But in the days leading up to the greatest sacrifice of the ruler's reign, it roared. The rains had not come. The maize fields had yellowed early, their stalks limp and dry like the arms of the dying. The wind from the Gulf, once a sign of relief, now stung with heat and ash. Traders spoke of distant famines, of rebellions in the hill towns. Even the priests whispered of imbalance. Omens misread, cycles disrupted, gods silent. And so, the ruler prepared to remind the heavens that Venta still bled. The great offering, they called it, a convergence of tribute and devotion unlike any the sacred city had seen. Over weeks, the ceremonial court transformed into an open wound. Trenches were dug in sacred geometries, deep lines in the earth that formed eyes, mouths, serpents. From across the region, offerings poured in, masks of jade, knives of polished obsidian, figurines of pregnant women carved in greenstone, jaguar pelts stiff with salt and blood. And among them, there were children. They were not called that, of course. They were called voices, breaths, pathways, vessels for the gods to enter the world again, selected by birth date, by vision, by ancestry, raised not to fear death, but to walk toward it as a form of return. Their faces were painted with maize flour. Their hands were bound in cords woven with symbols of the sky. They sang the old songs as they were led toward the mound. The ruler watched all of it unfold from the summit. His face bore the paint of the rain god, his headdress a towering mass of quetzal feathers and flayed bark dyed red. The mask over his mouth was carved to resemble a beast's snarl, but beneath it, his lips were dry, cracked, silent. He had not slept in days. The dream had returned. In it, the river rose, not with water, but with blood. And at its center, drifting motionless, was a colossal stone head. His head. The current dragged it deeper, deeper, until it vanished into darkness. Each night he awoke to the sound of rushing water. But there was no water. Only the pulse of drums, calling him back to ritual. The day of the offering arrived. Thousands gathered in the plazas. Some came to pray, others to watch. Still others simply because not coming would be noticed. The scent of copal thickened the air. Shell horns called from the four corners of the city. Priests moved like shadows, arranging the offerings into precise formations. Children in rows of three, jade in spirals, obsidian blades fanned like feathers of death. The ruler descended the mount in silence. As he walked through the ceremonial court, people knelt. They did not cheer. This was not celebration. This was necessity. A city pleading for survival. A city offering its blood to hold the sky in place. He stepped onto the central platform, an altar shaped like a cross-section of the underworld. Beneath it, a hidden chamber had been prepared. There, the offerings would be buried. There, the blood would run. There, the gods would drink. The first child was brought forward. She was no older than 5. Her eyes were calm, not empty, as if she understood more than anyone else. The ruler looked at her and saw not a vessel, not a symbol, but a person, a heartbeat, a possibility. He hesitated. The priest waited. The drums slowed. Time thickened. And then, with a gesture almost invisible, he signaled the blade. He did not wield it himself. That had not been required since his own initiation. But he watched. He always watched. The child was laid upon the stone, and the obsidian did what it was made to do. The blood soaked into the channel carved into the altar. It ran down, slow, deliberate, tracing the same path the ruler had once walked as a boy. The crowd did not flinch. They had seen this before. But something in the air shifted, as if the silence itself had recoiled. More children followed. More songs, more offerings. The trenches filled with artifacts and bodies, layered like the sediment of belief. The earth became an archive of faith and fear, sealed not with prayers, but with weight. As the final offering was lowered into the ground, a massive mosaic of jade and serpentine, shaped like a jaguar devouring a sun, the priest turned to the ruler. He was to complete the ritual. He was to cut himself, to let his blood fall onto the altar, to seal the covenant. He reached for the blade. His hand did not move, not because he was afraid, but because he was empty. The gods had said nothing, the earth had not opened, the river had not wept. All he could hear was the child's breath from hours earlier, the exhale before the blade, the human sound that no prayer could erase. And so, the ruler did what no one expected. He placed the blade on the altar. He opened his palm, and instead of cutting himself, he closed his hand around nothing. A pause. Then the priest, unsure, stepped forward and drew his blood for him. The crowd did not notice. The ceremony continued. The earth was sealed. The chants rose. But the ruler had not made the sacrifice, and the gods, if they were watching, said nothing. That night he wandered to the river, alone. He stood at its edge, staring into the black water, waiting for a sign, a whisper, a ripple, anything. Instead, a jaguar appeared on the opposite bank. Its eyes glowed. Its breath steamed. Its body shimmered with the power of something not entirely real. For a moment, the ruler thought it would speak, but it turned and vanished into the forest. He returned to the palace. He undressed. He lay upon the stone floor, arms outstretched, and for the first time in years, he wept. Not for the city, not for the children, not for the gods. He wept for the silence. The silence did not end with the sacrifice. It grew. In the days after the great offering, Venta appeared unchanged. The markets reopened. The priests resumed their chants. The altars were swept clean. The sun rose over the mount as it always had. But something beneath the surface shifted. It began in the voices, quieter, clipped, uncertain. Then in the glances, avoiding, sidelong, calculated. And finally in the pauses, those spaces between action and response where belief once lived, now hollow. The ruler felt it long before it had a name. He wandered the palace halls with the heaviness of someone no longer expected, but still required. His presence was a function, not a force. He nodded at courtiers who bowed too deeply. He dined in silence while the nobles performed ritual laughter. He stood at the edge of ceremonies but did not join them. When asked by the priests for interpretation of omens, he gave none. When asked by the people for blessings, he raised a hand but said nothing. He had become a symbol of endurance, not guidance. And in his absence, others began to listen. The priesthood fractured, quietly at first. Doctrines once whispered now found audiences. Some argued the gods were testing the ruler. Others claimed he had broken the sacred chain of blood. A third faction said nothing at all, but their silence was its own kind of protest. Even the sculptors, once tasked with immortalizing him in stone, began shaping their heads with features less like his. Rounder, ambiguous, symbolic, not specific, as if he were already a memory. Among the inner circle, one figure began to stand out. His name was Tekut, a scribe turned seer, known for his sharp tongue and sharper eyes. He had never led a ritual himself, but he was present at all of them. He never questioned the ruler publicly, but he quoted old proverbs about the sky choosing new messengers. He gave gifts to the palace attendants. Small scrolls, rare seeds, coins pressed with ancestral glyphs. He became popular, not through fear, but through familiarity. And in a city trained to see power only in stillness, his movement was like water on stone. The ruler observed it all with a detached stillness. He no longer met with his advisors. He no longer summoned emissaries. He watched the city from behind jade-latticed windows, the sounds of La Venta filtered through ceremonial veils. He began speaking to no one, not even to his son, now grown, now restless, now questioning. The boy had inherited his mother's silence, but not her patience. He visited the ruler one evening, unannounced, draped in ceremonial cloths that he wore more as burden than pride. He stood before his father and spoke words that had not been heard in the palace for months. "The gods are not listening." The ruler said nothing. The boy continued, "If they do not speak, we must." But the ruler did not raise his head. Instead, he looked past the boy into the polished obsidian wall where his own reflection had begun to fade. And in that silence, the boy turned and left. The next morning he was gone. Some say he left for the hill towns. Others claimed he rode east to the coast. A few believed he vanished into the forest to seek the old gods. The ruler did not search for him. He merely ordered the boy's name removed from the lineage scrolls. Not out of anger, out of inevitability. He was now alone. And the walls began to speak, not aloud but in ways only he could hear. He heard footsteps where none walked, whispers behind pillars, scratches along stone floors that hadn't shifted in years. At night, the sounds deepened. He would wake to the echo of dripping water, but the chamber was dry. He would hear the rustle of feathers, but no birds had nested in the mound for generations. It was not madness. It was memory rising through the cracks. In desperation, he returned to the buried altars beneath the pyramid. He walked among the sealed chambers, where children and jade slept in layered silence. He laid his hand on the oldest offerings, hoping for heat, for voice, for anything. Instead, he felt cold. On the third night of his descent, he found a mark he did not recognize, etched into the wall with the edge of a blade. It was not a glyph. It was a handprint, small, as if pressed in fear or finality. He did not know whose it was, but it followed him. He began to speak aloud, at first to the gods, then to himself. Not prayers, but questions. Why did you choose me? Why do you stay silent? Why did I survive? There were no answers, only echoes, only the sound of stone listening. Then came the rebellion. It did not begin with fire. It began with forgetting. Priests began performing rituals without summoning the ruler. Offerings were made in new places, far from the ceremonial center. A new mound was built, smaller but crowded. It was called the Mouth of the East, a place where the people prayed not for rain, but for change. The ruler summoned no guards. He gave no orders. He simply watched as the ceremonies multiplied, as the gods he once channeled were claimed by others. He did not contest it. He had lost the will not to be challenged, but the will to be obeyed. One evening he wandered into the plaza alone. No one recognized him. He wore no headdress, no paint, no cloak. Children ran past him laughing. A priest crossed his path and did not bow. He stood at the foot of the great mound, the one he had built, the one he had sanctified with blood, and found it quiet, untouched, abandoned. At its summit, an owl perched, watching. The ruler did not climb. Instead, he walked to the edge of the ceremonial court and sat. For hours, for days. No one disturbed him. No one asked. The throne had not been taken from him. It had simply been left behind. And he, now a man of stone and silence, finally understood the weight of being worshipped only when one cannot answer. The sky changed first. It was subtle at the beginning. The clouds became slower. The winds shifted directions. The sun rose at angles the priests had not predicted. The birds, once clustered in sacred groves, flew inland. The river thickened with silt. The smell of rot began to rise from the canals that fed the ceremonial gardens. And the people noticed. But they did not look to the ruler. They looked elsewhere, to new shrines along the eastern edge, where young priests offered different songs to different gods. Gods without names, gods without rules, gods who had not grown tired. At the mouth of the east, they burned offerings of colored feathers and milled maize, not blood. They danced in circles instead of lines. They sang in harmony rather than chant. And when they called for rain, sometimes it came. The ruler remained where they had left him, not deposed, not defied, merely unneeded. The great mound stood behind him like a carcass. Grand, yes, but hollow. The altars beneath it, once thick with offering, now settled into dust. The obsidian knives dulled. The stone heads eroded. Even the trees at the edge of the plaza began to lean away, as if Venta itself were shrinking into the ground that had once elevated it. Inside the palace, time unraveled. Rooms that once echoed with ritual music now lay silent. Courtyards grew wild. The pools turned stagnant. Servants came less often, and when they did, they left quickly. The ruler did not stop them. He no longer gave orders. His voice had become an artifact, like the old masks no one wore anymore. But the gods, if they still existed, were not silent. They had simply become wind. Every night he heard it, a low howl that passed through the corridors. It was not a scream, not a song, just pressure. A weight that moved through stone like breath through lungs. It carried no message, only presence. One evening, the wind carried something more. Fire. It began in the outer districts, small fields beyond the main canal system. The crops, dry and brittle, ignited under lightning with no rain. The people ran to the river, to the swamps, to the hill pass. But they did not run to the mound. They did not call for the ruler. They did not seek blessing. They simply left. By dawn, the fields were ash, the ceremonial garden gone, the birds gone, the laughter gone. The ruler watched it all from the summit. He had climbed the mound alone, in silence one final time. He wore no robes, only the red paint of his youth, drawn across his chest with trembling fingers. It was not for the gods. It was for the memory of being chosen. Below, the city emptied. The plazas, once thunderous with drums, held only shadows. The causeways cracked. The mosaics buried in the sacred precincts shifted under their soil blankets, never to be seen again. He remained on the summit until the second night. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He simply sat. And then he stood. And he walked into the mound. There were tunnels beneath it, some forgotten, others sealed, but he knew them. He had been led through them as a child. He had bled in them as a man, and now he descended for the final time. Torch in hand, he moved through chambers where jade offerings lay undisturbed. He passed altars layered with serpentine and shell, figurines with eyes worn smooth by centuries. At the final chamber, he stopped. It was the first chamber, the place of his initiation, the place where he had once emerged a god. Now he entered it to become silence. He placed the torch in a niche. He closed the stone door behind him. Outside, the wind blew louder. Weeks passed. Those who remained in the city whispered of visions, a jaguar seen at the mound, a figure in red disappearing into stone, a sudden stillness that fell across the ceremonial court. But no one approached. No one opened the door. No one claimed the throne. Eventually, even the whispers stopped. La Venta did not fall. It was not destroyed. It was abandoned, left to the vines, the moss, the sky. The mound remained. The stone heads remained. The mosaics remained, hidden beneath the earth. And deep inside, the ruler remained. Not in body, perhaps, but in presence, in silence. He had not died in revolt. He had not been overthrown. He had simply outlived the need for belief. And that is how the gods die too, not with thunder, but with forgetting. The first thing they found was not a face. It was a shadow. When the archaeologists came, thousands of years after the last chant faded from La Venta's plazas, they came with shovels and notebooks, with maps and microscopes, with theories and questions. They stood at the edge of the mound, now overgrown with roots and vines, its surface blistered by centuries of sun and silence. And still, it stood. It always stood. They dug in layers, in quadrants, in careful increments. They uncovered fragments of mosaic pavements, jade beads dulled by soil, figurines shaped like gods whose names no one remembered. But it was only when they unearthed the first colossal head that the silence truly broke. He stared at them, flat-nosed, wide-lipped, unsmiling. Not a god, not a monster, a man, the ruler, or someone like him. There was no name, no inscription, only presence, only mass, only the weight of having once mattered. More heads followed, each with subtle differences, some broader, some narrower, some wearing helmets carved with curling glyphs, but all shared that same expression, solemn, still, unblinking, watching. They called them colossal heads, marvels of Mesoamerican art. They debated their purpose. Were they portraits, deities, thrones, warnings? They studied the lines, the tools, the minerals embedded in the eyes. They charted their placement, measured their orientation to the stars. And they wondered, but they never knew, not fully. They found the mound. They found the buried offerings, serpentine blocks, carved celts, figurines layered in spirals, as if laid by someone building a pattern no longer understood. They uncovered the central court, the altars shaped like cave mouths, the underground chambers. But they never found the ruler's body. No tomb, no bones, no seal, only space. As if he had stepped out of history and into myth before the earth could close around him. In museums, his face became an exhibit. School children stared up at the heads in glass cases. Tour guides spoke of the Olmec, the mother culture of Mesoamerica. Historians marveled at the alignment of sacred architecture. Artists sketched his image on postcards. Scholars gave him names. Ruler A, Monument 1, the man from San Lorenzo. But he had no name, not really, only echoes, because that was how he had ruled. Not through armies, not through declarations, but through presence, through ritual, through silence so complete it echoed into the future. And in that silence, something strange happened. He endured. When kings fell and temples burned, when languages vanished and new gods rose, he remained, unmoving, unchanging. Not because he had one, but because he had let go. Because he had walked into stone, not for glory, but for disappearance. And that, perhaps, is what makes him eternal. Not the mound, not the mask, not the myth, but the absence. The space where a name should be, the void carved by devotion, the silence mistaken for death. In the end, what remains of the ruler is not his face, though it still stares. It is not his city, though its earth still breathes. It is not even his story, though we tell it now. What remains is the paradox, That a man who could not speak to the gods became a god to those who could not speak his name. That a king who stopped ruling outlived the need for kings. That a voice buried beneath centuries of stone became the clearest echo of all. And so, he waits still, beneath the mound, beyond the face, in the hush between belief and forgetting, in the stone that breathes when no one watches, in the silence that made him immortal.